Hey everyone, this is the Everyday Junglist. I am on my way back to Mexico after being up north for a bit, visiting family. I thought it might be interesting to give people a glimpse of what it's like crossing the border back into Mexico from the U.S. by car. So I'm pretty close now to the border on I-5 as they call it here in San Diego. It's 6:30 or so, so it's a little bit. It's dark. Straight down here. Or fairly close to the border. I don't know what traffic's going to be like. It could be fairly backed up, or it may not be. It's really hard to say. That the crossing into Mexico has been pretty backed up. Basically, since out here, but it's maybe getting worse. All the time, basically. But really, it's very much hit or miss. You just don't know until you actually get down here what it's going to be. Well, it's early the weekend. So today's what is it? Is it again? Not Wednesday, Tuesday. So Tuesday, typically you would think there may not be as much traffic crossing into Mexico on the weekends. So it's only Thursday, Friday are about south borders. In any event, there's multiple ways you can get down here at the border. I came from the airport, so traffic was bad in San Diego, Southern California, so traffic, of course, is always pretty bad. But it's actually looking quite good here so far. It looks like it's not going to be a big line here. I don't actually believe I actually don't know if I can actually record actually through the crossing itself. I've not seen any prohibitions against that specifically. I know coming from the U.S., going from Mexico into the U.S., absolutely it's prohibited. I spoke way too soon because I just backed up fairly significantly. So, yeah. So yeah, this is the back of the line, okay, and the back of the line way to get into Mexico. So we're probably about, I'd say at least a half mile still north from the border. And there's two both the 805 and the 5 converge here, and both of those highways going into Mexico. And so, yeah, this is going to be, gosh, of course I was optimistic and I should have known better. But you kind of have to be in this lane. I've made this crossing many times, and it's yeah, there's kind of an art to it about where you want to be as far as the car repositioning and that sort of thing. I could go on and on about it forever. I'm not going to bore you with it, but my wife's probably the only one I know who's done this more than me, and she really knows the different tricks you can pull to try to get advanced in the line, but really there's not much you can do. And people get, as you might imagine, this line goes on, it gets quite long. People get very frustrated, and there have been all sorts of fights, violence. People stop, people get out of their cars, and see some pretty crazy stuff happen here. But right, hopefully tonight hopefully we will see something. I don't know, but typically the only times I've seen crazy stuff happen has been during the day, but I don't know why that is. But in any case, I guess we're gonna have more time to chat than I thought, and I don't really have anything prepared to talk about. But I will say what I was talking about was the recording of actually going across the border itself. So there is no prohibition that I know of. I've seen no signs indicating from the Mexican side that you cannot actually film while you're crossing the border. However, about crossing into the U.S., absolutely there are signs you cannot do that. However, it's interesting. When I first moved down here a couple of years back, there were no signs about video prohibition. And I actually sent 2 emails because I was doing this show at the time. I was trying to do this YouTube thing called Border Crossing. And I actually sent, because I wanted to actually record going across the border itself, not just the drive there, but so I sent 2 emails actually to Customs and Border Patrol asking about if it was prohibited to actually record while crossing. And the emails I got back made 0 sense. And I couldn't make heads or tail of the email. It was complete gibberish. But I think it basically said that it was sort of up to the individual person at the individual crossing the lane, I guess, that you went through. It really made no sense. And I didn't want to risk it because I didn't want to take a chance of losing my Century, my global entry thing, which, makes my crossing a lot easier. So I never did actually film doing the actual crossing. But I did do a number of episodes of just the drive up to the border. And of course, they were huge smash hits. I mean, I must have got at least 4 views out of some of them, if not 5. So, like most things I do, I was really popular. And I get tons of requests all the time to revisit that series. Maybe someday. Anyways, yeah, clearly I'm not being serious. Obviously, the 2 people who are watching this, or maybe it's 3. Hopefully, it could be. You never know. Anyways, yeah. So it's dark. Okay. So I'm not going to actually record. Bottom line here, I'm not going to record actually crossing the border here, just out of respect for the Mexican authorities. Even though I have not seen a prohibition against it, I don't want to get in trouble with that any more than I do with the U.S. authorities here at the border. So I'll go as far as I feel is reasonable, which is quite a long ways from here, actually, because it's a ways to go. As you can see, so I'm on the 805, so I'm on the 5 here. Up to my right is the other highway that merges into here, the 805. There's two major north-south freeways, highways in the San Diego area that both end at Mexico. And what's happening here, one of the reasons this is so backed up, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is there's major construction happening just across the border in Mexico on the Mexican side, right along the border. I mean, and you'll see it because I will plan to get the camera back on here after I get across, so you can actually see what I'm talking about. But there's a major, basically super highway, bridge, tunnel, massive construction project. I've written about this. I took a picture and read a story about the picture, and it's going to be huge for the city of Tijuana. I mean, it's going to revolutionize the area, I think, economically, and hopefully it'll ease some of this congestion. And that's part of the idea. Everything I think really ultimately the border crossing, this San Isidro, which is where I'm crossing on the U.S. side, San Isidro border crossing, what it's called, is the most heavily trafficked, most used land border crossing in the world by a long shot. So it is massive. It's big and it's really, really heavily trafficked. This is the Mexicans' corresponding side, I guess, where you actually cross into Mexico from the U.S. side. I will do one of these in the other direction too, so you can see that's part of it too. But hopefully, I'm not sure if I can actually edit these videos or not. But maybe I can take out some of this nice time just sitting here saying nothing. But oh, hey, Redbert, my favorite subscriber. Welcome. I did it sort of impromptu, no sort of pre-advertising or anything. I figured, oh, what the heck, maybe somebody would see it and enjoy it. And of course, it gets posted afterwards. But yeah, I'm crossing. I was just explaining. If you obviously just joined, but I'm crossing into Mexico I was up in the U.S. up in visiting my folks, and I'm in line now on the I-5. B5, as they call it here in San Diego, annoyingly. I really hate it. It really bothers me. Why can't they just call it I-5 or I-8 like a normal state? But no, they got to be all fancy about it in California. But anyway, so it's the 5 and the 805 where they meet, and they actually at the border here to cross it in Mexico. And it's 6:38 local time, so it's rush hour still basically, and that's why that's one of the reasons why there's so many cars in this line. The line is actually moving pretty quickly compared to normal. So oftentimes this line, it just creeps. Now, this seems like it's creepy, probably if you're not used to it, but this is actually pretty bad. I think quite fast for a normal line this time of day. The whole thing about crossing the border in both directions is all about lines and waiting. You gotta have a lot of patience, and many people don't have patience, which is why there's so many fights and so much violence and different things in these lines, in the border lines, especially in the car lines. Pedestrian lines, I don't think necessarily are as bad. They're just as long. But I think there's maybe less violence or less weird things happening because when people in their cars just get really bad out of shape. And the one thing you don't want to do is cut. If you start cutting in front of people, that's the ultimate sin when you're doing what's happening with border lines, is to cut in front of somebody, take their spot. People really get very, very upset about that. And really, literally, people have got out of their cars, people have been shot, people have been got in fights, fist fights, people running other people's cars. Anything can happen. And that guy, what the guy just did there was pulling off over. I don't know if you can see that, but he pulled over in front of that guy, and that's, we're far enough away that the etiquette of the line is kind of strange. We're sort of far enough away at this point that it's still kind of acceptable to do stuff like that. But once you start getting in real tight closer to the actual border, that kind of thing gets, more and more frowned upon. I guess the idea is, you've spent, because you're waiting so long, you've earned your place by getting there at a certain time. And if people start trying to cut in front of you, you feel like they've taken your place. I guess. I don't know exactly what people are thinking. Mostly they're not thinking. They're just like, I want to get the fuck out of here. I want to get home or wherever the hell I'm going. And all these people clearly do not live in Mexico. I mean, I don't believe all these people in this line live in Mexico. I don't think it's possible. And I always wondered, there's so many cars going into Mexico. I don't know where all these people go, because you'll see, when I'll turn this back on once you get across the border, you get to a point and all of a sudden the cars all disappear. You're like, where did everybody go? And I have no idea. I mean, Tijuana is a huge city, obviously. So there's plenty of places where people go, but it just looks to me like there's way more people than there is space for them to go. But anyways, that's the kind of weird stuff to think about when you sit here for hours on end. I think the longest it's ever taken me to get into Mexico is probably 2 hours. I think is probably the longest, which is a really long time to be sitting in a car. It felt like a day. Usually it's on the order of 20 minutes. If there's no traffic, it takes about 2 minutes. And if you don't get stopped, because The point here is going into Mexico is much easier from a let's say looking at you perspective because they really are more, I say, welcoming. They really want people to come. Unlike the U.S. side, it's more about security, and we really don't want you to come. It's sort of a different philosophy of visiting the country. They're much more strict about. I don't know. It's just a different attitude, a different philosophy. They both are, of course, concerned about security and such, and smuggling, whatever happens across the border. But it's a different kind of attitude from the people that work there and the way they approach it. And Mexico wants to get as many cars across the border as they can as quickly as possible. So that's because it helps their economy. Depends on it, basically. I mean, so the economy of Tijuana is absolutely dependent on people from the U.S. coming down there, and vice versa. Really, this for this reason. But but in any case, they try to cross as many people as they can. And so this line tends to move more quickly than the line from Mexico into the U.S., which can really, really move slowly. And it's a whole other story, that situation. When I do that one, I'll do one of those where I cross into the U.S. or Mexico. I can describe all the different intricacies of that, but it's weird. It's like it's like a class system almost. We have the people that have these high security clearances like myself, and then there's other people that have slightly less, and then there's people that have none. And the people that have none, you could be waiting in the line for 8 hours or a day or a day and a half, 2 days. I kid you not. There's times when lines have gone. People have waited in the line for a day to get into the U.S. and people get up at 1 in the morning, 12, midnight to get to a job at 9 a.m. up in the U.S. because they can't. Otherwise, they won't be able to get across in times. It's pretty crazy, actually. But for me, it's typically 20, 10, on the 10 to 45 minute range, and usually more. The average is probably 15 minutes to get across. But going to Mexico, so most people, they just wave right through, and you aren't stopped or inspected. But there's a random selection of certain folks that get pulled off the side, and they go through your stuff, and you got to show your papers and prove who you are, that you're legitimately you have a visa or whatever. I used to be only like a year ago or so, before the politics got so crappy between the U.S. and Mexico. They were even that kind of stuff was sort of like, okay, they weren't really very serious. I mean, I don't want to say they weren't serious about it, but there's a lot more, I guess, flexibility, I suppose, on the part of the Mexicans to letting people in who didn't have the right documentation or whatever. That's very much changed now. I mean, they've gotten much more strict. It's in direct response to the U.S. being, kind of dickheads about the same thing too, of being real strict on documents and everything, order and all that kind of thing. So, and you would think that would cut down on traffic here, and it did for a short period of time. But then I guess everybody got their documents in order. I don't know what happened, but traffic really never died down all that much, and back to where it was back then, those days, in my opinion. There's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 10 lanes here. And one of which is a return to the U.S. lane. So if you really get screwed up, you can get that far left lane over there, and you can do a U-turn and get back to the U.S. But it's quite. If you ever do that, I never had to do it, but it's kind of scary. You have to go up this thing and press a button, and this big old gate opens up, and it's pretty intimidating. I don't know if that would do it. I've never had to do it, fortunately, but anyways. Sometimes people don't know where they're going, and they end up like, wait a second, I'm going to be going to Mexico, because you can't turn around. And if you don't have documents and stuff, you can really get yourself, kind of into some trouble. And if you have to declare things, so it's like, I don't know, if people go traveling internationally, customs, and you have to declare certain things. You have to declare that you're bringing in the country. There's monetary value and different things. So that's a whole other process. And those are the far right lanes, which I'm not in. I'm in sort of the middle lanes. And I have an unstable connection, and that's going to happen because near the border, cell signal is crappy, really crappy, especially with all these people around. Yeah, I apologize if the things going in and out. I was just saying the cell signals around the border here are notoriously crappy, mostly because there's so many. I think there's so many people on the network that you can see all these people around me jammed in here. But also, I think there's monitoring equipment. There's all kinds of different things happening on both sides that contribute to that cell instability. When I did my other show, my border crossing show, that was recorded. That was not live like this is, so it was a little different. I didn't have to worry about that. Just as good though, I got to tell you, it was just as interesting and just as popular. I see people are being quite polite, and you won't hear any horn honking here. Sometimes, and it's interesting. This is not like New York City or something where people in a traffic jam like this. It's just everybody just going nuts, laying on their horns. I don't know if it's still like that today, but some parts of the country where people are just laying on their horns and stuff when a traffic's clogged like this. You don't get too much of that here. People are mostly because I think people are worried about what someone else might do based on some of the stories and things probably most people see that cross the border a lot. And it's the people that don't cross a lot that cause the problems, I think, because they don't necessarily know the etiquette or what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do. And the people that do cross a lot tend to feel like, oh, these people are idiots, and which they are, but they were idiots once too. That's what people that cross a lot don't have to remember. Because I remember the first few times I crossed, it's so intimidating. You don't know your ass hole in the ground. You don't know what you're doing, where you're going, or what could happen to you if you could do it wrong. and there's no help. I mean, there's like no help online. Literally, that's one of the reasons I was doing that border crossing show, was to try to help people understand what they should do, because there's no instructions about what to do. And in fact, they change too. Like things that what you're supposed to do or not do kind of changes, and there's no way that's not communicated. At least in a way I ever found, or at least I found that I could use. So you have no clue what you're doing when you come down here. You're like, oh, I got to cross the border to go to Mexico, and then you're like, well, what do I need to bring? How do I do it? Like, where do I go? And especially coming from Mexico into the U.S., the road. I mean, Tijuana is a maze, and the roads make no sense. And there's 3 different lines. You don't know which one you're supposed to go into. You don't know how to get to the line. And if you get to the wrong place in the line, you can't cut into the line, so you got to backtrack. And I mean, I spent, I think, the first maybe 2 or 3 months I lived here, I spent more time looking for the end of the line than sitting in the line, and I was completely lost. I mean, I can tell how many occasions I got completely lost in Tijuana. And sometimes this is a nighttime, and sometimes a day, and you're like, and you're new there, and so you hear all these rumors about Tijuana, how dangerous it is, and this, that, and the other thing, which is really not, at least in my experience. But you hear all these rumors, and then you're completely lost. You don't know where you're at, and it's like the middle of the night. So you're trying to find them, So it can be pretty scary too, in addition to being pretty damn intimidating. But anyways, that was one of the points of the show I did, or whatever you want to call it, YouTube video thing I did. And I don't know that it ever helped anyone, since I guess only about 4 people watched any given episode. It probably did not. But hopefully it did help at least one person, save them some aggravation. Although they probably got more aggravated listening to me jabber on about shit than it was going to save them in that other aggravation at the line. So usually here I go to the right, but I'm gonna get crazy here. I'm gonna stay left here. There's like a little split coming up here. I got a whole system mapped out. So everybody has their system. Everybody that crosses regularly has a system of what lane they want to be in, and where and why, and where they should think they should be. And I'm sure if you were a mathematician or a statistician or such, and you had or a civil engineer or whatever, you had access to all the data of cars and their movements and times, you could actually project what the smartest path is. Or maybe you can't. That only be totally random. It'd be really interesting to find that out. I'd love if somebody could do that, because that would really be interesting to see what the data says about what actually is the smartest way to do this, to get to with the idea being you want to get to the border as quickly as possible. Because you've got so many cars, and everybody's making decisions, at different times about where to be and where to go, and you'll see when we won't. I'll have to turn the camera off at some point. Probably not. I can go. I think not even a bit further here. So we're getting closer to the actual crossing, but we're still a ways away. Probably still been 1,000 yards or so. That bridge, I don't know if you can see the bridge there. That's a pedestrian crossing bridge, which I think is now open. That was closed for a little bit. So that's if you cross on foot. And crossing on foot is a whole different experience than crossing in a car, which is also a whole different experience from coming in a plane. So that's and the documentation requirements, at least by air, are slightly different than by car, which I find interesting. So you need to have one example is that to cross by the plane, you need a passport book. But for crossing in a car, they will accept a passport card. I have both, which I think I would recommend if anybody has ever considered living in a foreign country. Absolutely get both, passport card and a passport book. Not only does it help if you lose one or the other, which I tend to lose things. It's a disaster when you live in a foreign country. You lose your passport. It's an absolute disaster. It's a nightmare, and I've done it. And in fact, one of the things I did up here on my trip this time is I need to go to Brazil, and I need a visa to go to Brazil. Now, to get a visa to go to Brazil, you need to surrender your passport. But by law, when you live in a foreign country, you cannot surrender your passport, because you have to have it on you at all times. Okay, so there's this catch-22. So what do you do then in that situation? Well, it turns out, and not many people know this, and I didn't know it either, you can actually get a second passport. This is one of the few. There's some permitted conditions where you can get a second passport to cover the situation. So one of the things I had to do at my trip up here was go to a post office and fill out the paperwork and whatnot to get a second passport, so that I will have that second passport. So that when I send my one to the Brazilian consulate or whatever to get the visa put in, I'll still have a passport on me, so I can legally still be in Mexico. But you have to have it on you at all times. At the same time, I'm very close to having my permanent residency here in Mexico, which is another interesting thing. And actually, I think Thursday, actually, I'm going to have to surrender or I will be without a residency card for 2 weeks, and I cannot leave the country. My temporary residency card I have to give up at that time until I get myself for 2 weeks. I can't leave the country of Mexico until I have my permanent residency card. So I won't be going anywhere in the U.S. for the next 2 weeks after tomorrow. I think it's Thursday. I can't remember. But for crossing here, technically all you need is a passport or a passport card, and of course, and they also want to see your car registration. Typically, there's a lot of stolen cars. I guess move across the border, try to move across the border. So they always want to see your car registration, basically those things. And then, of course, if you have anything in your car, they will inspect it oftentimes. And many times people are, because as I was saying about the customs thing, there's a value of materials you're allowed to bring into the country without having to pay tax on it. And for a temporary resident like myself, I think it's $300 is the maximum value. But there's also categories of things, like depending on what category it falls into. So there's all kinds of weird nuances to it. But many times people either aren't aware of it or they try to ignore it, and so then they ended up getting busted because they find out they have to pay taxes, and it's not easy to navigate that process actually, because it's not simple to figure out how to actually do that. There's a little station up here off to the right, and then you have to actually go in there, and you have to get to a certain process. There's an order to it, and if you don't speak Spanish, it's very confusing in terms of what you're supposed to do actually to navigate that process. And and I think the first time that happened to me, I had to go and to pay. So I was completely confused, completely lost, and there's nobody to help you, and everyone's looking at you like an idiot, which you are. You're an idiot. And basically zero Spanish. I tried to figure what the heck I was supposed to do, and I started just watching people. And eventually, I was able to watch what enough people did to kind of figure out where I should go first. And then once I got that first place, I was able to kind of then watch from there the next step. It's like a 3-step process, but there's also they only accept, I can't remember, they only accept cash I think they only accept cash or credit cards at a certain hour. And it's just some weird thing like that. There's no ATM, or the ATM only works at a certain time. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's possible to get stuck in that place because they won't let you leave if you've already got that far. And if you don't have the money to pay the tax, they won't let you in. And so you can be stuck there until the bank opens or the ATM opens the next day. And I've heard this has happened to people where they stay in this little hut thing or whatever it is overnight until the bank opens or this ATM works or whatever it is. But then you get the money out to pay the whatever they call it, the tax, not the import tax. That has not happened to me. So this booth coming up here, I'm going to turn the camera off here. I'm going to stop recording after I get up to these booths here, because these booths are sometimes manned by U.S. Customs personnel inspecting exiting cars. So it's rare that those are manned, but they are from time to time. And oftentimes I think that they're looking for specific people. Maybe they think someone's trying to flee across the border, and then they'll man these booths up here. There's like 8 or 9 or 10 of them or something, and they'll have people in there. They'll be checking IDs and different things basically I think it's usually typical they're looking for somebody. But it can be pretty intimidating too, and I don't appreciate it when it gets to that intimidation level, because there are sometimes there have been on occasion non-uniformed, irregular military folks in these booths, and I don't know, there's like all black. I don't know if it's black water personnel or what these people are, and and they've got guns and they're very intimidating, and there's not much you can do about it, obviously, but it's uncomfortable. And then you see the CBP people who typically are in charge here are not. They're subservient to whoever these other people are that come in. And it's only happened. I've only seen it a couple of times. I'm sure it has happened more often than that. But that situation is weird. And there's an intimidation factor where it's almost like, why are you leaving the country kind of thing. It's like, it's sort of like giving you a hard time for leaving, which I don't quite understand what the motivation is behind that. But in any case, that's really only happened one time. At least I've been seeing. But yeah, there's nobody manning those stations right now, so people are just going right through. And as soon as I get past those, I'm going to have to turn off the recording. And it'll probably take me, after I do that, another, depending on if I get pulled over or not for inspection, it'll take me another maybe 10 minutes, if that, to get across. So I'll flip it back on at that point. I'm returning from a trip. So I only have my suitcase, which just has some clothes. I mean, I don't really have anything in here. I didn't stop at any. I did pick up some stuff, some of my mail. So, but it's nothing valuable. So I So I have no issues here as far as if I get pulled over. I don't know how they decide who to pull over for inspection. I think it's partly random, but I think there is some you know method to the madness, I guess. But I think they're looking at people who, if you have like six couches sticking out of the back of your truck, they're probably gonna pull you over and make sure if you don't, and then if you don't go through to pay the cut, over to the to declare that, they're probably gonna stop you and ask you, to show you proof. What is the value of those six couches or whatever you have there on the back of your truck, because you got to pay tax on that, and some people are just not aware of that. All right, so I'm gonna stop the recording here after I get through these booths here, and I'll be back on as soon as I get across the border.